In 1978, after a bunch of political assassinations and general turmoil in the country of Afghanistan, a revolution would take place within the government dubbed the Sour Revolution.
Sour. Sour.
But within Afghanistan, another rebellion would take place outside of the cities in the countryside. The Mujahideen, now known as the Taliban, would rise up against the government. The Soviet Union to their north would look down as maybe a new ally was being taken down by themselves. Fearing the US would ally themselves with the Mujahideen and with the new Islamic Iran, they invaded the country, beginning a 9-year war in which an estimated 100,000 would die, 15,000 being Soviet, 90,000 being Mujahideen. But the vast majority would be civilians, which is more estimated in the millions. Whole villages would be wiped out as a sort of retribution for Soviet soldiers dying. Men were shot as they were thought to be associated with the Mujahideen. Soviet soldiers would have their heads cut off and put on pikes. War crimes were committed on both sides. That's not what we're talking about today, however, because if you really want to read about that war, you can choose to do your own research. Today, however, I want to talk about the very interesting underlying things that happened during the war. That being the common use of song during the conflict. Being in 1980s Russia, their music was a dark ensemble of tragedy and death, similar to the ones made about the Yugoslav conflict in the late 90s, which was way more popular in the sense of music, with there being such classics as My Father is a War Criminal, and Oh Alia Alia, where they make fun of forced starvation. For God's sake, this is the same country that during political strife would play The Black Swan, a dark story about a swan lady who finds her love and in the end, losing said love, so she kills herself. I compare a lot of the music from this time to a bit grunge. It's very dark and tells stories of soldiers, some on helicopters, some who blew themselves up, some that just ask how pointless the war was. Today I'm going to cover a few. Starting with, if you don't want to eat the jam, don't catch. For most of these songs, there isn't a lot of context, no matter how hard I really looked. This one took some digging, but this particular version was performed at an air base near Afghanistan in 1988, sung by the military band Cascade, which most of these songs are sung by military bands, fair warning. If You Want to Eat the Jam, Don't Catch is a semi-comedic, semi-serious song that discusses a soldier's life in Afghanistan and his stories. The name is a reference to a saying by the officers during the war that roughly translates to, if you want to eat the jam, don't catch flies, you shitface. Jam was a hot commodity during the war, with it only being given to officers. Catching flies, well, don't get shot and stay frosty. So please don't get shot so you can eat the jam. The song has this sort of loudspeaker tone to it. Afghanistan is a Muslim country. In the capital Kabul, every morning there's a prayer that is some wannabe rooster calling a sort of alarm clock for people to pray. Or that's how I interpret it. Soldier discusses his new friends, as in his soldiers. Then he says how you can't take them for Afghans, and that even if they had a burqa, you still would say that they aren't Afghans. He talks about a military operation where they needed the GRO, also known as the GRU, better known as the Spetsnaz, and how they push it off, saying that they're just going to blow the place up anyhow. Finishing the song by retelling a race that happened in Kabul where Ukrainian Chernigovs had a race against each other, then yelling expletives because they crashed. And the beat to this one in particular, bro, it's a bop. Just listen. Eat the Jam, Don't Catch sort of seems like I can't fully understand it because I wasn't a part of that war. And so that's why I'm sort of just describing the lyrics, like literally. It could be interpreted to be anything. I'm kind of sad that this part's the shortest because this is probably one of my favorite Soviet Afghan songs, just purely because of the bop of a background tune that this has. Overall, 8 out of 10. Blue Berets.
Расплескалась синева, расплескалась, по тельняшкам разлилась, по беретам, даже сердце синева затерялось.
The Blue Berets, not the UN, are a Russian musical group for the VDV, better known as just being Russian paratroopers. Founded by Sergei Isakov, Oleg Gonstov, Igor Ovchenko, and
No, unacceptable.
Igor Ivanchenko in the middle of the Soviet-Afghan War. They even made an album titled The War Has Ended, with songs such as On the Dangerous Line, which is the recounting of a battle. Another called Mountain Near Pershwar, which is an actual story that I can talk about other than it being romanticized. The song does telling the story fairly well. On April 26, in Pakistan's fortress turned prison for Soviet soldiers and Afghan communist forces, a rebellion began dubbed the Barbadar Rebellion. 51 soldiers will rebel against the Mujahideen guards, who at the time were being supported by the Pakistanis and being trained by the CIA. After morning prayer, the guards would find 2 of their own dead and the armory being raided. A standoff would ensue for the next 2 days. A Pakistani tank battalion would show up and shell the building. Several attacks would be routed until the Pakistanis brought Grad missiles and blew everything up. Estimates from the Russians say 100 dead, Mujahideen say 27 dead. All reports say that all 51 Soviet and communist Afghans were killed. The song has a dark sound to it, but it's weirdly uplifting. The guitar and how it sounds generally is very good. The last one, however, is more propaganda than I can sit down and listen to. The song is called Roads. It's a song about the lead singer remembering his time in Afghanistan. But instead of being sad, he sounds like almost okay with it. In the chorus, he says he'll remember the courage he gained from going to war, which is a really weird sort of statement. Keep in mind, he also says sometimes he wakes up and thinks about being shot at, which is like a very easy PTSD diagnosis. And also, the more that you look about the Blue Berets, the more you realize that they're just like Russian state propaganda. The Blue Berets get a blatant propaganda out of 10. The next song that I want to talk about is Swallowing Dust. But it's a very, very dark song, and it talks about specific things that happened during the Soviet-Afghan War. So, instead of recounting it, I'm going to let the soldiers themselves recount it in this documentary that you should go and watch.
It was a day when the enemy entered the village and fired on the outpost. We were on duty. Me and my friend Habib were in defensive positions. We were laying an ambush. I could sense they were close. When they fired, it was clear they were somewhere close. Then I sat there with the blood running, lots of it. I was soaking wet. I felt as if I'd been shot time and again. I kept looking and saw something moving out there. It was the Dushmans, the same enemy who had shot us. I lay down on my back. I looked at them. I couldn't not look at them. They came and had a look at me first, then my friend. They'd shot him in the chest and he was unconscious. They threw my friend into the water and came over to me. Then they cut my finger off. I could feel it. I thought they might cut my head off. There's nothing good I can say about Afghanistan. There's nothing good I can say. I've served for 2 years, and I still don't understand a thing. You can't understand who are the civilians and who are the enemies.
In the Soviet Afghan song genre, there's a lot of songs about the Soviets leaving the country. Farewell to the Mountains is the one I chose because out of all of them, I liked it the best. The lyrics are beautiful. That's how you describe the lyrics. Talking about how they are leaving Afghanistan, the mountains, and our peaks from home. Shameful but proud as they walk home. The Soviets' exit Afghanistan is historically known as better than the most recent mess. But still, they left all those people to fend for themselves. And just like in 2021, the Mujahideen wasted no time in taking over what was left. The song talks about how they conquered the peaks and now they are only being slandered and lied about, which is very similar to Vietnam veterans' experience when they came in. The chorus includes that no scholar should judge them on the side of the Mujahideen. Afghanistan, well, she bled the Soviets to their limits, and well, with problems at home and a new bald premier, the war was over. So in 1989, the Soviets left. The Soviets would leave millions of Afghans to their fate. Then they would leave CIA-trained Osama bin Laden to plan an attack, which would end with the third invasion from an outside force. To the end, which I think really is the crux of this matter. A war funded by other countries that, after seeing the pain and suffering these Russians went through, Americans would never understand the pain of the grieving families. Well, up until we go in. The Soviet Union fell for a multitude of reasons, but one of the biggest ones was the loss of a small, failed state being able to beat the Soviet army. A loss of life so great that the might of the largest country in the world has to leave or surrender in awe of guerrilla warfare and destroyed supply lines. Seeing that just sending men over the top doesn't work. This story sounds all too similar, yes?